It's almost time. Our program will begin soon. Please take your seats. As a courtesy to others, please silence your electronic devices. And don't forget to use the Summit hashtag, CFA Summit.
All right, welcome back from the break. Okay, we're going to be kicking off our Civic Innovation Track keynotes. I am very pleased to introduce Simone Brody, Executive Director of Bloomberg Philanthropies What Works Cities, on how to include data in our quest for equity. Please join me in welcoming Simone.
Great, good afternoon. Hi, everybody. I'm Simone Brody, Executive Director of What Works Cities, and I'm thrilled to be here today to talk with all of you about data, the stories it tells, and the way it can really drive change to improve people's lives. This isn't a crowd that needs a lesson in the power of data. I think the agenda for this conference really reads like a wish list for data junkies and good government geeks like myself. So I thought I would use the time to talk about how data can and really is being used to reach our most vulnerable populations and really address equity. And I want to really push back on a criticism that we hear a lot, which is that being data-driven is somehow the opposite of being human-centered. I think the reality is the best use of data really contributes to more meaningful engagement. It sparks conversation, it spurs innovation, and it really enables us to talk about this work in a more meaningful way. And so here, I think among the true believers, we really understand how digital technology can transform the way we provide services in government. We understand how data can help us really meaningfully understand the needs and the people of our communities. And we understand it because we see it every single day. I know that I really do. Before I joined What Works Cities, I worked in the New York City Department of Education during the Bloomberg administration. Mayor Bloomberg took office in 2001. If not at quite the dawn of the digital age, then very early in the morning. We were just beginning in City Hall to really understand the power of the internet and data to address our challenges. But Mike Bloomberg had already started really a data revolution in the financial sector, and he was determined to translate that into how New York City could approach its problems very differently. And in a city as big and diverse and frankly unequal as New York, addressing education was one of our biggest challenges. There isn't much that's more important to the future of a city than the 1.1 million children that are its future. Yes, in New York City, we educate 1.1 million children every year. So we launched a massive change operation to improve low-performing schools, to empower accountable educators, and to engage students and families. And it was such an exciting time. We were working to dramatically improve outcomes in New York, and we were seeing real progress. More kids were on track in elementary school, more kids were graduating from high school, and more kids were enrolling in college. What we did not see enough of was equity. We were making progress generally across the city, but somehow we were still missing some of the hardest to reach and most vulnerable kids. Achievement gaps between students of different races, different levels of privilege, were not closing quickly enough, and we really didn't understand why. So to find out, we turned to data. Of course, not for the first time, but in a very different way. For the most part, we had been looking at data across the city by race and sometimes by district. So we saw test scores, we saw graduation rates, we saw the broad strokes, but we didn't really understand the nuanced picture of what was happening in specific communities. And so we needed to go deeper. And to do so, we really needed to disaggregate the data, to break down this very large system into individual students and small groups of students to understand what was happening. And that made people, frankly, very nervous. On the one hand, people were worried that looking deeply into the data would contradict some of the great claims of progress that we were making. And our answer to that was that any lack of progress, anybody we were leaving behind, was not enough, and we needed to understand what that looked like. And on the other hand, some people were really worried that poor performance among disadvantaged students would perpetuate an idea that these students couldn't keep up. We knew that was false, and we knew that we could prove that was false. So we started digging deeper into the data. And sure enough, we saw really painful and real disparities. We could see pockets of exclusion that were leading to poor performance. We could see which kids were falling behind and when, and we could even begin to understand why they were falling behind. I'm going to give you one example. As we began to look at citywide test scores, broken down by where children lived, we saw that students in temporary housing, and that is 1 in 10 students in New York City, 100,000 students, were half as likely as other students to be on track in elementary school. It's obviously a really sad statistic in and of itself, but to make it worse, you have to understand that students living in temporary housing move more often than other students, and often they move much more often than other students. And what we saw when we went deeper was that vital information about what these students needed to succeed was not getting passed on to their additional schools as they moved. Sometimes it was academic information, and sometimes it was information about what they needed to feel safe and come to school really ready to learn. That could be a meal, it could be an adult they could trust, or it could be somebody to communicate with their parents about what their schoolwork was. And even schools that were tracking information to help students succeed often weren't passing that information on to other schools. And especially for vulnerable kids, that means a lot, because a child who falls behind in a core subject like math or reading might never catch up. And so it should come as no surprise that fewer than 1 in 2 of these students were graduating from high school. And that's how vulnerable kids fall through the cracks. It's how futures are lost, and it's how these intergenerational cycles of poverty are perpetuated. And so imagine, and we imagined, how different outcomes could be if crucial information was part of the enrollment data that every school must collect and connect to that student as they're moving schools. What we saw in our work was that data didn't always illuminate answers. Sometimes it just illuminated the right place to start a conversation. It identified the problem, and it gave us quality, nuanced information with which to chart a path forward. Disaggregated data also gave us information with which to approach educators and school leaders, many of whom were not even aware of the widely disparate outcomes of different groups of students, and who often used mostly intuition in their decision-making. To be clear, data are never a substitute for the powerful judgment of educators based on experience. But they are vital information to enhancing that judgment, especially when we do know that often that judgment can be clouded unknowingly by the inherent biases of our systems. By the same token, data also helped us dispel some false and really harmful beliefs. For example, that the challenges schools faced in disadvantaged communities were just too entrenched for them to tackle. Better data helped us see and learn from schools that were dispelling and defying that narrative. It helped us prove that, of course, schools with predominantly disadvantaged kids could and were all across the city excelling. And it enabled us to share what those schools were doing to help other schools learn. I'm very behind on my slides. It showed us that smaller schools produced dramatically better results than the massive schools that previously dominated low-income communities. That school choice had the potential to change the terrifying reality that zip code could determine a student's outcome. But that school choice alone was not the answer. It showed us that small class sizes weren't the magic bullet that many people believed they would be, but that maybe teacher quality was. And lessons like these informed our work and work across the entire school system. We identified risk factors for dropping out of high school or not applying to college, and we used them as flags across the city so that teachers could immediately work with students at risk before they were disengaged. The data and evidence-driven approach wasn't restricted to the Department of Education. Similar strategies were improving outcomes all across the city. And when Mayor Bloomberg left office, we saw so much interest from cities that wanted to adapt a data-driven approach to all of their service delivery, in education, in blight, in public safety, and even in climate change. And not just big cities, all cities. And that is the mission of What Works Cities. We empower and enable cities to use evidence and data to deepen their understanding of the needs of their communities, to use that understanding to design and deliver services more equitably, and then to track their progress so that they can direct precious resources most efficiently. And it's happening in cities all over the country, not just in big cities like LA or Boston, but in cities like Fayetteville, North Carolina, Bellevue, Washington, and Arlington, Texas. Let me give you 2 examples of the kinds of programs I'm talking about. Consider 911 and ambulance response times. EMS personnel respond to roughly 37 million 911 calls across the country every year. And nationally, patients wait an average of 7 to 8 minutes for an ambulance after a 911 call is placed. But that is just the average. Recent studies show that ambulance response times in low-income communities can be nearly 4 minutes longer than in high-income communities. And as we know, when every minute counts, this can literally be the matter of life or death. In fact, studies cite the gap in response times as a potential driver of income mortality disparities across the country. Virtually every city in the country struggles with this challenge of reducing response times without incurring unsustainable expense. How do you do it without buying more emergency response vehicles or increasing the number of first responders? And a deeper look at the data is helping some cities change their approach to this problem. Memphis, Tennessee is one such city. As the city started examining how it could improve ambulance response times, it began to see evidence that too many ambulances were being called in non-emergency situations. And as staff dug deeper, they began to understand that many residents simply lacked information about how to solve their pressing challenges. But they did know how to reach 911. So calls were placed and ambulances were dispatched when what callers really needed was somebody to drive them to the doctor or to have a nurse tell them how to handle a situation at home. As one city official put it, these callers were not abusing the system, they just didn't know where else to turn. As a result, up to 20% of ambulance calls could have been solved in another, less resource-intensive way. Armed with this data, the city of Memphis piloted a new program to dispatch a paramedic in a cherry red SUV to conduct an on-site medical exam in non-emergency cases, instead of sending a costly ambulance and a full response team to every call. Tracking data shows that this program is working. Response times in Memphis are down, people are getting the right level of care no matter where in the city they live, and costs are not going up. It's a great example of how data can help define a problem and innovation can help design a solution that works for everyone. Virtually all cities struggle with this question of how to make services more accessible and more affordable. And the idea that data and innovation can help is really catching on. Tulsa, Oklahoma is another great example. In 2008, the city's mayor commissioned an equalities indicator report to begin what he called a community-centered conversation to make services and outcomes more equitably grounded in standardized data. One of the most glaring examples of inequity was an 11-year disparity in the average lifespan of residents in the wealthiest and poorest zip codes in Tulsa. As the city dug deeper into the numbers, they began to wonder whether improving housing options for residents might help close this outrageous gap. So equipped with its own disaggregated data and other studies, the city began to rethink the way it allocated Community Development Block Grant funding, CDBG funding, for local housing initiatives. Many cities struggle with the best use of this limited discretionary funding to really advance stable housing in their communities. Tulsa decided to shift from an equal approach to funding, where funding was going to all of the neighborhoods regardless of need, to an equitable approach, with funding really going to the neighborhoods with the greatest need and the highest levels of poverty. Now the city is working to establish a partnership with community organizations to help evaluate the effect of this increased funding on mortality rates in their poorest communities. And this is how progress reaches everyone. The cities we work with and the partners who support our work share our conviction that we cannot solve our biggest problems unless we understand the underlying causes of those problems and the people whose lives are affected by them. And contrary to the common belief that data dehumanizes this deeply human work, it actually does the opposite. It enables us to see into the real lives of individuals, so many of whom are overlooked or obscured by looking at the big picture. It enables us to make our efforts laser-focused, right-sized, and truly able to meet the needs of the people we intend to serve. If you start with a big question and use information to engage your community and drill down to the core of it, and then test and measure potential answers to that question, hand in hand with your community, data is the most powerful and efficient tool we have to solve some of our nation's biggest challenges. So, what do I want you to take away from all of this? I think first that this is such an incredibly exciting time for all of us in this room. New tools and ways of using data are actually changing the way we dissect and take bold action on problems in cities and communities across the country. But second, that data alone really isn't enough, as so many folks talked about this morning as well. Data and technology just are not enough. They neither should be ever used to distance government from residents or to replace the invaluable role of listening to people. It can, however, be an indispensable tool to inform robust conversations and a deep understanding of the real needs of residents, and to create a foundation for innovative policies and programs. And third, we need to be really honest about what the data tells us. Sometimes it reveals failure, and we have to use what we learn from those shortcomings to change course and iterate until we get it right. And so what can all of you do to help? City leaders, so many of you are doing this already, working so hard to use data and tech to address inequity in your community. If you're already part of What Works Cities, great and hi. And if you're not, let's talk. I know there is great work we can do together, and we have a range of free expert supports to help you improve how data can drive results in your community. And tech community, as you know, government is the scale play here. It's worth repeating. The best opportunity for your tools and strategies to reach those most in need is by truly collaborating with local government in the communities where you work. They are the front lines of solving these problems, and you have a huge role to play in accelerating their efforts. Leverage your expertise to help cities better do their job. Share your data and go one step further. Help them to understand and use that data to meaningfully address these complex issues. Where you lead, others will follow, and the future of our cities and of our country is riding on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. The What Works Cities team has built an incredible community of practice in cities around data. Next, we turn to another community of practice, in a city, working with data. Please welcome to the stage Michelle Tong from the City of San Jose, the Digital Services Lead.
Do you remember what you were doing 5 years ago? How have your ideas about changing government evolved since then? I remember exactly what I was doing 5 years ago today. Here I am with Code for San Jose co-founder Kaylin Gallagher. We had just finished hosting Code for San Jose's first ever National Day of Civic Hacking, one of 98 events across the country that day. You can see the exhilaration beaming off our faces. We were brand new brigade captains at the beginning of a new adventure. The Code for America network represented everything that was exciting to me about this emerging field of civic technology. If a fairy godmother had appeared to me that day and told me that one day I would be leading the digital services strategy for America's 10th largest city, I would have started floating. Now, let's fast forward to a coaching session 2 months ago when I was grappling with new challenges in my current role. My coach told me to close my eyes, take a deep breath, and describe what came to mind. This is the image that came to me. Alone, in a desert, no shelter or relief in sight. The feeling, no one is coming. It's up to me. You know the Facebook 10-year challenge? If I had a Civic Tech 5-year challenge, this is what it would look like. I would love to see your Civic Tech 5 or 10-year challenges too. Feel free to tweet them at me. Now, I know this looks bleak, but what I've discovered over the past 5 years is that the reality of our work encompasses the emotions in both these images. On the one hand, optimism and energy. On the other hand, lonely, slow work, making progress one step at a time. On the one hand, connection with a network, a community of practitioners who inspire us to take action and try new approaches. On the other hand, digging deep into ourselves to find the courage to lead change in our own organizations. We need to acknowledge both these aspects when we talk about designing better government. I'd like to share a few stories about how key moments of connection and courage have shaped my path over the past 5 years. Chapter 1, The Call to Adventure. This is the story of how I found my way to the mission of making government work better. Back in 2013, I was toiling away as an urban planning consultant, doing economic data analysis. But as much as I loved creating beautiful Excel models and then packaging them up into PDF reports for our government clients, I started to feel that there had to be a better way for governments to learn from data. I heard the call to adventure when I walked into my first civic hacking event organized by Open Oakland, a Code for America brigade. The event, called City Camp Oakland, was about bringing the community together to tackle civic issues. And although we gathered in formal spaces at City Hall, the open structure and collaborative spirit were unlike anything I had experienced before. Sessions on everything from open data to equitable government were crowdsourced on Post-it notes, and the agenda was developed on a whiteboard in real time. The conversations were welcoming, spirited, and filled with a sense of invention. I decided I was ready to commit, so I got myself a job at San Jose City Hall. It was a leap of faith, betting on the potential to make impact in local government in a diverse, future-oriented city. But there was one problem. There wasn't a Code for America brigade in San Jose. Could I find a community of people to talk with about civic innovation? Being connected through Open Oakland to a nationwide network inspired me and my co-founder, Kaylin, to take action. With brigades forming all over the country, it became obvious that if we wanted to attend a civic hack night in our own city, we would need to start Code for San Jose. We signed up for an account on Meetup, scheduled our first hack night, and that was that. Over the following years, what took courage was embracing what Code for San Jose is and isn't. Beyond the lofty rhetoric of making our communities better, we've had to figure out exactly how we do that on a few nights a month of volunteer effort. And we've learned that showing up week after week is a contribution in itself. While we've pulled off great projects and energizing events, our most valuable output is not the apps. It's being an open, consistently welcoming space where on any given week, someone could show up and get inspired to shift their path, just as I did 5 years ago. Chapter 2 is about how best practices only get you so far. So after 2 years of working at City Hall and running Code for San Jose on nights and weekends, I joined the city manager's innovation team as it was starting up. This was my chance to start doing civic innovation as my day job. Our team benefited from connections to a strong and growing community of government innovators like the folks gathered here, who had already distilled the best of their work into playbooks that shared what had worked in other places. Through events like the summit, we established relationships with peers in other cities, and we heard success stories that informed our sense of what was possible. This is a photo of about 20 of us at the 2015 summit, and I can still remember notable workshops from past years, like one that Boston and San Francisco organized on writing user-centered RFPs. Their presentation was so chock full of advice that I still rely on it today, and I can even tell you the bit.ly link to go check out those resources if you ask me afterwards. And one of the things that makes Summit so energizing for all of us is that government innovation is at the center here. But the reality for most of us back at City Hall is that we are tiny teams compared to the scale of our governments. This red dot represents the size of our founding innovation team compared to the total number of employees in the city of San Jose. How do we make an impact on 1 million residents with 4 people in a government agency with a total headcount of over 6,000? With that in mind, our team has always embraced our role as multipliers, enablers. We need other departments to believe that innovation is core to their mission, not something on the fringe. And that's why, in our first month, we distilled the best playbooks from this community into 3 essential habits that we wanted to build across the city of San Jose. Champion the customer, learn through data, and iterate to improve. Best practices are great, but ultimately changing a culture requires the courage to listen to the surprises along the way. You know, when your principles meet reality. And for us, one of our most successful initiatives is something that was never, ever on our roadmap, using Agile for non-technical teams. We had started experimenting with Scrum on our own team, but didn't have a plan to roll it out citywide. But before long, we couldn't ignore the demand from our colleagues in other departments who saw Agile methods as a solution to a problem that mattered to them, prioritizing and getting things done as a team. Today, we have over a dozen non-technical Agile teams in the city of San Jose, comprising over 100 staff in departments ranging from emergency management to parks. Even better, our peers in other cities who've heard about this have been inspired to try Agile on their teams, like Mark Hebert, Innovation Director at the San Francisco Human Services Agency, whose work affects 1 in 4 San Franciscans. It makes me incredibly proud, but by sharing our stories, our work in San Jose has been able to impact change makers in other agencies. Chapter 3, Towards Inclusive Digital Services in San Jose. So as our team started to grow its innovation portfolio, what I needed to do was turn the idea of a digital services team from an imaginary thing in my head to something that other city leaders believed in and valued. And I got my opportunity when I was put in charge of one of our city's most important digital services for residents, our 311 app for reporting neighborhood issues such as graffiti, potholes, and illegal dumping. As those of you in local government may know, for many of our residents, a city's response to 311 requests is a measure of local government's ability to deliver on its promises. If they report graffiti in their neighborhood park and it's gone in a couple of days, they say, it shows the city cares. On the other hand, if they report a couch on their sidewalk and we never follow up with them and that couch stays on the sidewalk for weeks or possibly even months, they say, it's a black hole. You don't know if you're being ignored. And many other residents don't even realize that they have the option to report neighborhood issues to the city and get a response. They say, why haven't we heard of this before? Designing better government means making sure that our 311 app is inclusive of all of San Jose's residents. After all, diversity is one of San Jose's defining characteristics. 39% of San Jose residents were born outside the United States, and 57% of San Jose residents speak a language other than English at home, with Spanish and Vietnamese being the most common languages. So given these statistics, one of the first new features that my team was asked to implement in our 311 service was full end-to-end translation. But there was a big assumption here that language was the major barrier in making our digital services more inclusive to underserved residents. And I realized that we needed to better understand how to design for our diverse residents. So just as I realized this need, Code for America announced their new community fellowship, which pairs local brigade talent with government to improve services for vulnerable people. With this connection, we were able to use the fellowship to bring new capabilities into our organization. We brought on 2 designers, Nira Dahda and Julie Kim, both San Jose residents and Code for San Jose members. Julie and Nira conducted user research on the barriers and opportunities for vulnerable residents using our 311 app. They built relationships with existing community organizations to reach monolingual Spanish and Vietnamese speakers and develop prototypes that addressed multiple barriers they had discovered in their research. And as a result, we now have evidence for our city leaders in San Jose that making our services simpler makes them better for everyone. Once they had conducted this pioneering research for our city, it was my role to make it meaningful and relevant to the rest of the organization. So my call to courage came in seizing the opportunity to name and frame our user-centered approach as being fundamental to building equitable and inclusive services. Earlier this year, I was called to the podium in our council chambers to answer questions from our mayor and 10 council members. They wanted to know how soon we could translate our 311 app into multiple languages and the timeline for implementing other features. So in a public high-pressure setting like this, my first instinct was not to take risks and to stay within the lines of the questions that had been asked of me. I drafted straightforward technical answers on schedule and scope. Luckily, just in time, with a nudge from some supportive leadership, I realized that this council meeting was actually my magic moment to advocate for the value of user research. I shared Julie and Nira's findings about designing for simplicity and designing for digital access being as important to our residents as translation. And although our methods were new to the council members, it showed that we were serious about putting our residents' needs at the center of a conversation about equity. I'm also pleased to report that at the end of Julia Nero's fellowship, we were able to keep them on to work for the city as our first ever content designer and UX designer. So digital services is no longer an imaginary idea in my head. It's a funded body of work with a pilot team in San Jose. The fourth and final chapter of this story is about being a leader. It was great that we'd hired designers and that we'd built trust with council members, but we still needed to improve the way that we delivered our 311 services to our residents. The problem was that 311 service delivery spanned over 60 staff in 6 different service teams across 5 different departments, each with their own process, their own pain points, and their own ideas about what was most important. I needed to establish a shared vision that put our users at the center and got us all moving in the same direction. The connection that catalyzed the next step was the CFA Summit conversation that would grow into a 4-day discovery sprint at San Jose City Hall. So exactly a year ago, at Summit, between one of these sessions, outside this room, just outside this room, Caitlin Devine and I struck up a conversation. She had a background both in the federal government and now as a digital services consultant, and she offered really practical and down-to-earth advice for me, and also seemed genuinely curious about helping me figure out how to get local government to try more experiment-driven ways of working. I reached out to her over email, and after a few more video calls, Caitlin and her colleague Larry from Ad Hoc were on a plane out to San Jose for a discovery sprint. Now, before they came, I spent 2 full weeks on the phone getting the right people in the room. I pulled in department directors, division managers, frontline service delivery crews, everyone that internally had a perspective. I also pulled in Julia Nera, then our Code for America fellows, and amazingly, they recruited 20 San Jose residents for user interviews with less than a week's notice and no gift cards to boot. So over the course of 4 days, with all of these people in the room and Larry and Caitlin guiding us, we interviewed staff and residents, we mapped out our processes, we developed prototypes and tested those prototypes, and by the end, we had a vision statement for our 311 app that everyone agreed on and was excited about, and we'd identified our highest priority objectives for immediate action. After Caitlin and Larry left City Hall that week, I felt ready, but nervous. We had a North Star, but now it was up to me to guide everyone else in that room at the city in the right direction and keep us going in that direction. So as it turns out, I'm the type of person who is susceptible to wisdom from unlikely places. And in this case, it came from a fortune cookie message, which I have taped up on my wall. A leader is the person you will follow to a place you wouldn't go by yourself. This sums up the challenge that I set for myself in my role. It was my role to be the advocate and to be continually advocating for a more user-centered, iterative approach to our digital services. No one else was going to be bold for me. And it was new to our city, and I would have to advocate for these new approaches, knowing that we would meet obstacles, knowing that I wouldn't get everything right, knowing that I'd have to learn from my mistakes and admit that I'd make mistakes and try again. I'd be exposed. I'd be vulnerable. And I had to accept that discomfort and that uncertainty of being a leader in my city. And that's where we come back to this image of finding the courage to be the one to push things forward. You see, when I pictured myself in this desert it wasn't that I was left there to waste away. It's with the knowledge that I have the power to ask for what I need if I can muster the focus and the tenacity to do so. I know that I am blessed with supportive executive sponsors, with open-minded city colleagues, and with an ever-expanding community of practitioners who are committed to this work. And I'm learning that sometimes leadership is about making big, bold decisions or standing up in front of a room full of people, but it's also about the mundane things that we need to find the courage to do every day. It's about scheduling one-on-one meetings for candid conversations. It's about securing commitments to objectives and key results. It's about getting executives to agree to a new governance structure. It's following up with people on things they said they'd do or things you said you would do. And it's continually fixing things when they fall out of alignment. Most of all, I've learned that leadership can feel lonely, and it's not something that I can do alone. And step by step, by pulling in other people, by showing up every day, by building trust and applying the best of what we've learned from this community, we in San Jose are moving the needle on how we deliver services to our residents. We're improving not just the screens that our residents interact with, but the end-to-end service from reporting to triaging to responding out in the field. And while it has been essential for me to find my personal courage, our achievements have only been realized when I've succeeded at recruiting partners and empowering and supporting other leaders, and at asking for help. To design better government, we need connection to a strong community of practice. To design better government, we need courage to confront what's hard about this work, or what's hard for us as individuals to lead this work. And those two needs are interdependent. And it's this interdependence that I want to end on. This quote from Joseph Campbell sums up what I mean. We're not on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves. But in doing that, you save the world. The influence of a vital person vitalizes. So as I celebrate my 5-year anniversary in public service, my 5 years with Code for San Jose, and my 5th Code for America Summit, I am so grateful to all the vital people who have inspired and sustained me on my journey, who have influenced and vitalized me. From my fellow civic hackers who have energized and sustained Code for San Jose over the past 5 years, to my dedicated and inventive colleagues at the City of San Jose. By the way, if you want to join us, we're hiring. To brilliant brigade leaders from across the national network. Peers who are designing better government in other agencies. Partners and guides who've walked alongside the City of San Jose on our journey. Couple of really great thought partners with whom I have a really awesome bi-monthly Google Hangout call to trade ideas and advice. And many others who've influenced me with their writing, their thinking, and even their tweeting. So, how will being at Summit this week help you find courage and connection? And how will you inspire and sustain others along the way? Thank you.
All right. I feel like Michelle is throwing down a challenge. See if anyone can do it faster than 5 years. Okay, we are getting into our last track keynote of the day. And I think it's a pretty good segue from what Michelle was just talking about. In our next talk, From Volunteer to Public Servant, we are going to be hearing a few stories about people who have made the move from Code for America Brigade into public service. So I would like to introduce Leah Bannon, US Digital Services Product Manager and founder of Tech Rebalanced. Please join me in welcoming Leah.
Hi. Let's just so you have a nice thing to look at. That's one of only slides. Hi. So my story isn't exactly straight from volunteer to public service. I was a Fed and then a contractor, and I was pretty unhappy. I was frustrated with the normal things, unreliable tech, bureaucracy, and most importantly, I was managing a public website. It wasn't popular, it wasn't filling a need, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it with the traditional ways of building tech in government, which they kept telling me were the only ways. And it felt like I'd never get a chance to really learn how. I even started applying to some companies totally outside of government. But then I found tech meetups and Code for DC. I found a welcoming community that was excited to teach me. I knew a little HTML and could help with content, so they taught me how to submit pull requests. I started learning to code more and more, managed a few projects. I felt emboldened to go to more and more tech events, hackathons, hack nights, training, and even started organizing some. And the experiences and connections I made at these events and all the tech I was learning were significantly improving my career prospects and my life. But they weren't very accessible, and they were intimidating to a lot of different folks, and it was frustrating and depressing to me. So after a lot of user research, I came to believe that offering a range of training would help from basic 101 to advanced. I thought if we made the training day component just as important as the hackathon part, it would send a message that all skills and backgrounds were welcome, and it would make showing up more worthwhile for folks with less time and fewer resources. So in 2013, with the help of about a dozen women, I started Tech Lady Hackathon and Training Day, which is now more inclusive and awesome as Tech Rebalanced. And it really worked. It sells out to hundreds of folks from underrepresented genders, races, ethnicities, and trans folks every year. And it's continued to improve significantly since I retired and new organizers took over a few years ago. I found that attendees made a lot of new friends. They went on to learn to code. They got new jobs. They started showing up to more tech events. Tech events started getting a lot better. They started their own spin-off groups. And I realized later that the event gave people a different vision of what work, particularly in tech, could be like. Shortly after that, I was invited to become a Code for DC brigade captain, which I eagerly accepted. But I was still really frustrated in my job and barely getting to use my new skills. And then in early 2014, through the community, I heard about these crazy innovation fellows who were terming out. They wanted to stick around and start a team. They were doing it at the agency that buys staplers and tech in the same way, of all places. It was a risky team with a lot of doubters, an uncertain future, and you'd only be hired for a few years and you'd be easy to fire. Sound familiar? So to me, 18F sounded amazing because they were using agile and human-centered design in open source. And my paper resume wasn't exactly what they were looking for, but all my experience and practice and recruiting skills from the brigade was. The application process at the time was to write up an idea of what you'd like to work on in government and fix. I had 12 ideas, and I became one of 18F's first employees. I still felt so inexperienced and junior compared to them, but together with really supportive, protective leadership, subversive staff working groups, and the connections and community I'd built in the brigades, I was able to figure it out and grow. And then after maxing out my 4-year term at 18F, I moved on to the U.S. Digital Service at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where I'm lucky enough to be on the team that manages VA.gov, which has helped millions of veterans more easily access their benefits. And now everything is perfect. The end. So I've actually been getting frustrated again. And I've been a little critical recently of the digital service model, the one-year gigs, the burnout, but primarily with the pace of change. The digital service model was designed to demonstrate what's possible, and it's incredibly successful at that. But the point of demonstrating what's possible is that it's supposed to lead to greater change and improvements, and that part feels like it's coming along too slowly. For example, I can't stop thinking about how our government spends billions and billions of dollars on means testing, and the confusing half-functioning tech that powers it, all to force people to prove they need basic human rights like healthcare, housing, and food. And I'm not sure that rescuing these monster systems from falling over or making them a little easier to navigate is making enough of a difference. And most importantly, even if everyone woke up tomorrow and agreed people should have those things, I don't think our government would be prepared, or our movement, to deliver them, or even figure out how. The challenge with the model of demonstrating what's possible is that when you do something really well, especially with good design, you make it look easy. And so leadership thinks you can take these magically effective people and overload them with more and more projects, or spread them thin across other teams. Or you can copy and paste our methodologies and declare from the top that we're all doing Agile now. And so the path to greater change remains unclear. But to figure this out and scale lasting change, our movement needs to constantly grow and evolve and share the struggles and failures that we're learning from. But it's, of course, really hard to do that in government, as we all know. Summit is great for this, but it's not enough. And I think the brigades can really help. Because what I truly learned from my volunteer experience in the brigade and my time at 18F and USDS is that you can learn from the guides and best practices, but hoarding them in more lists and enshrining them in stone isn't the answer. Yes, forking and building on other teams' progress is crucial to growing as a movement, but they're just our best guess at one point in time. We're all still figuring this out, and we haven't solved it yet. And trying to advance our methodologies by mandating them from the top doesn't work. For government to really adopt them, they need safe space to practice them and even fail sometimes. You can't go from beginner to intermediate alone or with just training, and you definitely can't go from intermediate to expert without practicing. And that safe space is so crucial, because the key to our weird methodologies is that they throw out all the fake stuff that makes you feel like you're mitigating risk, like perfecting requirements and timelines, and they focus on empowering and protecting teams to find and address problems early. The best digital services all know that if your team isn't protected and empowered to find the truth and tell the truth, no matter how inconvenient it is, you'll keep making bad decisions and falling back into waterfall, and you won't fix people's real problems. My theory is that we can learn a lot from the Code for America brigades about advancing this greater change, both by going to them. It's where the curious, creative, subversive nerds are with the biggest hearts, talking about what's working and, most importantly, what's not working. But also from how they do it, because they're pulling people in from across our agencies, departments, local news desks, startups, and most importantly from the communities affected by government services and their advocates. And they're doing this through community events, free training, and small projects where you can safely practice your new skills. When we do this and we bring folks together in a room and share our knowledge, and we see so many people who care about fixing the same problems and sharing the same struggles, we come away strengthened and energized. We help people forge the horizontal relationships with their peers, focused on shared problems that last beyond our projects. We help them find champions. We help them feel like they're not crazy. We share our struggles and cool off from burnout together. And we make these opportunities more accessible to far more people who might not have the time or means that we do. And we need their voices and ideas to keep growing and evolving. And this is how we build a lasting, innovative, and impactful movement. I'm not trying to scrap the digital service model. It's what I do. I love my team. And to me, it feels like the place I can learn the most and have the biggest impact. But I want more. This isn't just a modernization movement. It's not a destination we'll ever get to. It's a movement to improve government for people and dismantle profiteering. And we need all the help we can get. So if you're into that, protect your teams, help them speak truth to power so they can stand up for users and better decisions and keep improving. Host community trainings and gatherings focused on our shared challenges. Check out your local brigade. They need all kinds of skills and experience. And if this is what you're doing and figuring out this movement sounds interesting to you, come join me. We're recruiting and we really need you. It's usds.gov. You can see it. There. We got a new website. It's great. Check it out. And now Harlan's going to give you an update from the brigades in Massachusetts.
All right. So Leah spoke about some of those really important issues that we need to grapple with. I'm going to tell a personal story, but also pick up on some of those themes that Leah discussed around the power of brigade communities to address some of these really hard problems. So, as you can see, my name is Harlan Weber, and I'm the founder of Code for Boston, which is the Code for America Brigade serving the greater Boston area. I am also the director of design for the MBTA, which is the Transportation Authority for Eastern Massachusetts. This is the story of how we got from here to there and what that journey meant for the civic tech ecosystem in Boston. But first, here's a little bit about our community at Code for Boston. As you can see, we're a large brigade, meeting consistently for the last 7 years, with a lot of engagement from our local government partners. When we talk about Code for Boston, we talk about a community that's part tech meetup, part nonprofit, part advocacy group, and also part social club. And this is what it looks like in person. This is a picture from one of our hack nights a few weeks ago, with about 70 people working on 7 different projects with 6 different government partners and nonprofits. And there is Matt Zagaya over on the right-hand side. The story of how we got there is the story of these 3 numbers: 7, 21, and 25,000. Start with 7. So it was 7 years ago, at this very conference, that a few regular citizens, some of whom happened to be technologists, came together with the thought that we could use technology to serve our neighbors and make our local governments better. Some of us were in design and tech, some had organizing experience, some didn't, but the work seemed like it needed to get done. And so here we were, in the Code for America basement, in the old office, trying to figure out how we were going to do this thing. And this is how it looked back at Code for Boston, at our very first meeting, with 11 people. And one organizer who had never organized anything in his life and had no idea how he was going to grow this community. But we found ways forward. We spun up projects with our local government partners in Boston and in the neighboring communities of Cambridge and Somerville. We ran events with our regional planning agency and our local planning board. We invited our partners into our community and taught them about user research and agile methodologies. And we went out into our partners' world of community meetings and city council chambers to learn how our local government worked. Like here, where we hosted a meeting of the Telecommunications Committee at the City of Cambridge, which was the first step on a 4-year journey to get an open data ordinance passed in that city. Our approach with our local government partners has always been from a point of empathy. As a friend and a partner, acknowledging that we know the things they're trying to do are hard. Building technology is hard. Opening data is hard. Changing culture is probably the hardest of all. But also, we wanted to let them know that Code for Boston was here to help, bringing different voices and a different viewpoint to the conversation. After a while, though, a funny thing started happening. Our partners started coming to us with some things besides project ideas or policy initiatives. They started coming to us with job descriptions and asking if we could get them out into our community. And our members, Matt, started applying for those jobs and also listing us as references. We started getting our people into government, including myself. Which brings me to our second number, 21, which is the number of those people who've come from Code for Boston and moved into the civic tech ecosystem, mostly in Boston. They've gone into positions as engineers and designers, as writers and event planners, in production and leadership, at the federal, state, local levels, both at home in Massachusetts and elsewhere in the country. For many of these folks, the positions listed here are actually their second or third stop in a civic tech role. And each place they go, they strengthen the bond between their new and their old agencies, between Code for Boston and our partners, and between each other. And it's this last piece that's actually the most critical. For example, just last month, I learned that one of our members hired another member into a development role on the digital services team at our regional planning agency. And that 2 more of our members teamed up on a freelance project around environmental justice. What we've seen is that when our members have the chance to work together with people who share their values, who know how to work together, it can produce amazing results. In this way, Code for Boston has really been functioning as a minor league for the civic tech ecosystem in the Boston area. And this has played out for myself as well. In 2014, I got a call from the state IT department. They were putting together an innovation fellowship modeled after the Presidential Innovation Fellowship Program, and they asked me to join. The new CIO at the state had been a partner of Code for Boston's when he was in the same role at the City of Boston, and he knew about the work I'd done there. It was an amazing opportunity, and I couldn't turn it down. So I quit my job at a startup, and I entered into public service as a UX design fellow. Plus, I got to work here. Well, not there, but actually there, in the state office building, a nondescript place, but full of opportunities and challenges and many incredible and dedicated public servants. And so we got to work as a fellowship class. My colleagues pursued open data, set up a digital communications team, and went after procurement reform. As a designer, I had the privilege of working on the first ever online statewide application for public housing, which centralized the application process for 242 housing authorities across the entire state of Massachusetts, some of which had entirely paper-based processes. This opportunity to serve some of the most vulnerable people in Massachusetts was amazing and humbling and filled me with a really deep sense of satisfaction. After that fellowship year, with a few of the expected bumps and bruises along the way, a sort of amazing thing happened. The state IT leadership decided to launch a digital service team, one of the first in the country at the state level, based in large part on the value we were able to demonstrate as innovation fellows. Our initial goal was to redesign and replatform the state website, mass.gov. But to get this team going, we needed to staff up. So we went back to the well, to where we knew we could find qualified, dedicated tech and design talent who had a shared set of values and a shared approach to building civic technology. We hired 4 people out of Code for Boston and 2 more from the larger Brigade network to fill key roles on our new digital service team and help it get off the ground. And man, did they do that work. We took a human-centered, data-driven approach to redesigning the state's front door. I managed a team of in-house designers and our vendor design partners, and we worked with our content engineering and data teams to really rethink the mass.gov experience. We rebuilt the content system from the ground up and the information architecture to be more service-oriented, to provide more guidance to constituents, and to help users get to the content they needed quickly and seamlessly. We also created the thing we call Mayflower, which is our comprehensive design system to ensure a common look and feel across the website and other state digital properties. So, after that project was completed, I moved to my current job at the MBTA, where I get to work in another nondescript government building full of amazing government workers, and where I manage another team of amazing designers working on software that helps 1 million people move around Greater Boston every single day. I had an easy landing there because 2 Code for Boston members were already there, and I was able to get in and hit the ground running. And that brings me to my last number, which is 25,000. That's the total number of active Brigade members in the United States. So Michelle showed this map earlier. There are Brigade communities in 76 towns and cities across the United States doing the same sort of work that we do at Code for Boston. And the impact of those Brigade communities can go far beyond project delivery or data visualizations or even policy work. Brigades are a form of civic empowerment. They raise the water level for civic engagement and provide a rich and meaningful form of participation in our local government. We help our members to understand that government isn't this mysterious and remote thing. It's a system that they can positively affect, that they can touch, that they can impact. And in some cases, our members can actually feel inspired to enter public service themselves. Which should be important to my fellow Govies in the room. Who here is a Govie? Hands up. Great. So I know that you need help. All of us in government need help. I know that you're looking for people to help power digital transformation in your town, in your city, in your county, or your state. A transformation that's inclusive, that's sustainable, that makes a meaningful difference in the lives of your constituents. Journeys like mine, or Leah's, or Michelle's could be the norm, which brings me to that map again. So, if you're a Brigade member who's made a similar journey and moved into government, I'd like you to stand up right now. Stay standing. Thank you for your service, first of all. I know how hard, just how hard, you've all worked to get here. And now, I'd like all the other brigade members in the room to also stand up. So the first group are the folks who made the jump. But these are all the people who are ready to engage with their governments. So if you'd like to bring new voices, new skills, and a fresh perspective to your organization, to your government, your nonprofit, wherever you are, this is the way to do it. So, all you government folks, get out to your local brigade, meet your community, meet your volunteers, because they're also your future partners, your future collaborators, and your future colleagues. Thank you.
Hello again. Thank you, Harlan and Leah and Michelle and Simone. It was an incredible round of remarks reminding us that it's about the people in this work. It's about our communities of practice. It's about our teams of doers. Thank you. It was a great civic innovation track today.
All about making the tent bigger.
Indeed.
All right. So, thank you for coming to this last session of the Civic Innovation Track keynotes.
Indeed.
We're going to ask you again to please use your apps and provide feedback. That's all the incredibly important data that we need to make sure that we keep improving each summit every year.
Yes, so please take a minute and rate and review. We're going to close out this segment and send you off to a break. We'll wind down the live stream for today. So folks on the live stream, see you tomorrow bright and early, 9 a.m. Pacific, where we'll start the day with a Digital Service State of the Union featuring the U.S. Digital Service Administrator, Matt Cutts. Everyone else, head off into a break and find a great last session to close out your day. And then we'll see you at the Tech Fair after we wrap up for the traditional cocktail hour. Clearly we need that.
Yeah, we've got
See you
this.
all. Thanks.
Thank you.